Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our CitySwitch Demystifying Carbon Accounting Platforms seminar today. Thanks for coming along. And as you can imagine, we've got a few people joining over the next few minutes, so I'll just give everyone a little bit of time. We've got 80, 86, 90 registered for today, so should be a great turnout.
Always when you need waiting music, I find.
Yeah. So 22 have joined us now, which is fabulous. Welcome if you've just joined us. I'm Emily. I'm the CitySwitch City of Sydney Program Manager, and this is our Demystifying Carbon Accounting Platform session. And if you are just joining, I'd encourage you to drop your name into the chat. Let us know who you are and which business you come from, and perhaps where in the country as well you are today. We've got a good number coming from Sydney, Melbourne, but then all around Australia and potentially even New Zealand as well. Just to let you know, this session will be recorded, and we have a CitySwitch YouTube channel if you're not familiar with all of our webinars and recordings over the last few years, and we'll drop this recording up there, and then we'll also add it to our resource list on the CitySwitch website, which is cityswitch.net.au. So we're up to about 40 participants, which is fabulous, and might be time to get started. Just introducing myself again, Emily, I'm City of Sydney CitySwitch Program Manager, and you'll probably find all of our program managers are joining us as well today from Melbourne, Adelaide, North Sydney, Melbourne, North Sydney, Adelaide, Waverley, Ballarat, Yarra, and Afan has just dropped a message in the chat too. He'll be taking on my role from next week. I will begin, as always, by acknowledging the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the local area that I'm on today, and I'd like to acknowledge their continued connection to country, pay my respect to the elders both past and present, and also extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on the call today. Might move on to that next slide, and I'll just provide a little bit of context here as far as CitySwitch. This is our pathway. If you're not a member and not familiar, there's 7 steps to net zero for a business that we roll out through campaigns and resources and events, webinars like this one. And this topic today, demystifying carbon accounting platforms, sits under that measure business emissions section. As well as probably later down that pathway in committing across your value chain and greening your supply chain. So that's why we're all here today, to give you a bit of support and education surrounding that area. It's a fairly fast-growing market, carbon accounting platforms. So CitySwitch and Edge have put together this research and will be delivering the results of that today. I will add a quick disclaimer. The CitySwitch and the councils that support CitySwitch don't endorse any specific providers in the market. What we're here for is the tools and resources for educational purposes only. That's all from me. Would love to see a few more intros in the chat. We've got about 50 who have joined us now. But otherwise, I'll pass over to the team at Edge Impact, who will be running this session. Thanks, Dee and Vanessa.
Thanks, Emily. We're all really thrilled to be here today to cover what's becoming a more and more important area of work. And given that we do have such a diversity in the audience today, we've really tried to put an agenda that has a little something for everyone. And so we'll be giving a bit of a broad brush overview of what is the landscape that these carbon accounting platforms are currently sitting in, and a little bit about what we learnt from CitySwitch members themselves around what they're looking for. And we're really fortunate to have Jack Russell and Sam Bell join us from two organisations that have had different experiences around their use and exploration of carbon platforms. So we'll be sharing a little bit from them. We'll have time at that point to really take any questions from yourself that you want to direct to Sam and Jack. And then following that, we'll move on and we'll kind of do a little bit of a deeper dive into two kind of areas of particular interest when it comes to thinking about carbon platforms. And one of them is around data collection and governance and the type of planning that an organisation can do. And another is around how these platforms are now starting to play a beneficial role when thinking about decarbonisation and Scope 3 strategies. And then we'll have time after those two speakers to then take your questions. And as people speak, if you want to just put your questions in the chat box, we'll be able to look at them from there and then draw them out, or people will have a chance to pipe up in the meeting at that point. And then to round out the whole session, we'll be going through a bit of a checklist, things to consider when going out and thinking about planning and selecting a platform as a way to kind of close out the session today. And Emily at the end will be able to give a bit of a summary of next steps and where some resources can be found as well to help you along on your journey. So in terms of the carbon accounting platform landscape, so stakeholder expectations of transparency when it comes to sustainability and climate-related reporting have been definitely rapidly increasing in Australia and worldwide. Carbon accounting is definitely a crucial component of this, as it really provides a very structured and data-driven approach to measuring and managing an organisation's impact. We've seen the International Sustainability Standards Board that was established a few years ago develop and publish a set of global reporting standards. And it was just around this time that we had the IFRS be released. And it's the second kind of standard in this suite that really requires organisations to calculate a carbon footprint. And what's relevant, particularly compared to NGERS, is that this will also include Scope 1, 2, and 3. And it's these standards, these voluntary standards, but at a global level that have really influenced what are some of the requirements that the Australian government is currently putting through into legislation. And it was just last Thursday that an Australian bill was passed through the House of Representatives that's about implementing mandatory climate-related financial reporting requirements. And so this, while it won't include all organisations in terms of mandatory obligations, it will be felt most likely by entities of all sizes across the supply chain. So if I could go to the next slide, Vanessa. So having a requirement for providing kind of sustainability and climate related information, we'll start to see organisations of all sizes probably starting to then move towards calculating a carbon footprint. And really this is about making more informed decisions at all stages throughout the year, not just in the reporting season. And this has great benefits. Better data equals better insights, equals better decisions, equals better outcomes. And we can see this when it comes to things like operational efficiencies, the types of cost savings that can be realised, the ability to really engage strategically with suppliers, the ability to track against strategic goals and outcomes, and really kind of making that internal business case and having the data to provide any sort of kind of proposition put forward to the board, and also just to engage broadly with employees within your organisation. So having a single source of truth and a single place where a lot of these data points can be captured, it's one of the key benefits as well of having a carbon accounting platform. If we move to the next slide, you can see that this is just a screenshot from the 2023 Climate Tech Industry Report. And as you can see, it is just an exploding landscape, if you like, of data management software, and increasingly platforms that are very specialized around carbon accounting itself. And there are various pathways you can go down along when it comes to tech solutions. I think many are familiar with Excel. So there's nothing wrong with Excel. It's been the backbone of many of our working lives. You're able to collect electricity data, particularly manually. It's been the life source of carbon reporting for many organisations up to this point. But it is not a long-term solution, particularly for Scope 3. So we're starting to see there are tailored solutions, low code that can be built on platforms like Power BI or Power Apps. They can integrate into your systems. They can be customized to a business, some level of automation, but there can be limitations as well in terms of the amount of investment that's required upfront and the amount of data sets that can be incorporated. So you also see a lot of off-the-shelf solutions, very specialist data management systems that provide a lot of calculation services in the background. I'm starting to see a lot of automated data capture to really cover that growing breadth of data sets that are available and also important. So really, depending on the company, it can also have limitations being off the shelf in terms of what it can integrate with. So you may see now there are some off-the-shelf solutions that will also offer some hybrid approaches when it comes to tailoring a solution. And I think the key difference when we think about this is really the breadth of data that you need to be managing and can be captured in a system. So the better the data is, it will be granular, it will be specific, it will be collected at a high frequency. To have that level of quality data obviously can be very labor intensive. So it requires a lot of collaboration, a lot of coordination between multiple parties. And so this is really where we start to see the benefits, again, of carbon accounting software. It saves time, it really can support engagement, and it's the one-stop shop when it comes to having one place where a platform can start to record any changes, any manipulations that have been done to the data that will make it auditable when it comes to aligning to a reporting requirement and standard. So as part of this engagement with CitySwitch, thinking about this broad landscape, and even on this meeting today, we have people that are at various stages of the journey. So we went out to the broad membership and just asked them what they were looking for in a platform and what their experience has been. And broadly, as a membership based organisation, we can see some of the key challenges are around just having the data available to be able to make the most of a platform, and having that kind of internal within a company engagement, but also with suppliers themselves, particularly when it comes to Scope 3. And as a result of that, just having the time and resources that are available. So against those challenges, the top 3 critical requirements that members were looking for was to have the customer support. That includes having some training, having some support, particularly through the onboarding process. And that can be, for not just the key kind of project lead within an organization, but for all the different users that might be taking part in terms of the platform for the organisation. Data security, obviously, and really having that accessibility, having an interface, having a platform that's intuitive and easy to use. And ease of use can be defined in different ways. Certainly, being a platform, we can translate into different functions and features that different platforms provide. A big one is around automation, like having integration with a business platform that allows an easy kind of upload of data. But it can also very much come down to how user-friendly that whole process is. And also to be able to use the platform, how much knowledge of carbon accounting is required by a company in the first place to get the most out of the platform and be able to interpret those results. So the ability of the platform to really highlight and compare emissions hotspots down to kind of that facility and site level was mentioned by members as being an important feature that they're looking for. And we have the great pleasure thinking about what broadly members wanted to be able to really talk to two members today to talk through their different kind of experiences. So Jack, I'd really love to invite you to kind of share with the audience today Airmaster's journey through this.
Right, thank you. Just briefly, Airmaster is quite a large heating, ventilation, and air conditioning and refrigeration and fire services company. We've got about 1,200 employees and about 600 technicians across refrigeration, air conditioning, and electrical services. And we have about 70 apprentices as well. And we've been a CitySwitch member for about 10 years. So and I think it actually helped us being a CitySwitch member when we started to look at our emissions. We already had a little bit of a head start compared to some other companies. And my name's Jack. I head up our working group, our sustainability working group that was used as a way to set up our performance tracking. Next slide, please. So our challenge we were finding particularly over the last couple of years, that we were getting more and more requests for ESG responses from our customers. In tender submissions, we found that 70% of our submissions required quite detailed ESG responses, and I think in the past we've kind of managed to do with having good policies and being able to share those policies and procedures with clients. But we found more recently that those customers were demanding very specific data, looking for targets, looking for progress against those targets, which we've never seen before. And I suppose as a business has grown, our focus is on working for larger organisations, for property trusts, for the healthcare sector, airports, so forth. So the clients that we want to work with are the people that are demanding demanding those results from their supply chain. And we also found that a lot of clients were starting to use third-party assessment tools such as EcoVadis, which are international platforms. So it was very difficult to just send some info and make it look like we're providing a good response. It's very transparent, and we had to do more than what we were doing previously. Next slide, please. So we identified some risks if we didn't track our emissions properly and set targets. Our reputation was vulnerable. If our reputation was a risk to our stakeholders, to our customers, and also our suppliers. If we're we're at risk of not being able to meet compliance and future reporting regulations, which are obviously coming through quite soon. And obviously being able to manage the rising costs of energy on our business and other resources that we use was a big risk as well. And we also identified that there was a competitive risk with our in terms of the companies that we're bidding against. That if they were able to provide better responses, they're more likely to win contracts over us. But also our being able to retain and get new talent to our company. We recognise that there was a generational thing where a lot of younger employees that we want to have in our business are very much more conscious of what the company they're working for is doing as a company than perhaps in my generation when I was first starting out. Next slide, please. There were some risks in setting targets. So obviously, what if we can't achieve our targets? What's the ramifications of that? There is some cost that we have to add to our business. Hopefully, there's some benefits there in the long term, but there was certainly some investment required. And operationally, how we transition some of the in some parts of our business into different ways of doing things, and particularly with a fleet of over 550 service vehicles, which are primarily diesel and a small number of petrol, transitioning to some sort of hybrid electric vehicle or eventually electric vehicles is a really significant challenge for us. Next slide, please. So far, what we've done is we set up a sustainability working group with different representatives from different departments. That was since 2022. And I think the first thing we realized that we couldn't set targets. We didn't actually understand what our position was. So we implemented a process of figuring out how to do that. We had an internal process of getting business case approval without going to the board. So we were able to get funding to get a sustainability reporting platform. And we identified early on that was very important for credibility within the company to have a third-party solution rather than just a hacked about Excel spreadsheet. So we procured a system in 2023, and we focused on scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, and we've tracked our emissions from 2021, and that's been the sort of starting point for establishing our targets and further reporting. Next slide, please. So we've now established our scope 1 and scope 2 targets using the science-based target methodology. We've made our commitment at this stage on 2030 targets. We've got our platform up and running. We've generated 2 annual reports from the platform so far, and we've updated our environmental and sustainability policy with our targets. And we've now already are in a much stronger position than we were before. We've got a lot more confidence in what we're doing. We've got a lot more confidence in what we can say to customers that we're doing. And I think having good data and being able to understand and report on that has provided a lot more engagement internally with our branch managers and departmental managers in terms of starting to do a lot more projects at a sort of local level as well as at a sort of corporate level. It's been a lot of hard work, but a positive experience so far. And next slide. Our lessons learned. It's required a lot of behaviour change to get employees involved, to get access to the data sets that we need. It requires a lot of enthusiastic volunteers to make this work. We've really focused on scope 1 and scope 2. Our next challenge is scope 3. but we found focusing on scope 1 and scope 2 was a good way to go about this, and we feel much more confident on going ahead with scope 3 now. Management has got confidence in the data that we're presenting within the business and to our customers, and yeah, we've had a very significant increase in projects being initiated from our employees, because they can actually see the progress and see where we're going, especially. Yeah, look, that's a sort of a summary of our story, and I hope that is helpful for everyone looking to do the same thing that we have. And I'll hand you over to Sam for her story.
Thanks so much for that, Jack. Definitely very insightful. And as Jack touched on at the start, I'm sure there's many of us here that all have similar challenges in this space. So hopefully some of what I share on behalf of Duratec is helpful to you guys as well. So just a bit of background on Duratec to start. We sit in the construction, engineering and remediation sector, and we primarily operate as a remediation contractor. So we serve to extend the life of existing assets and protect and remediate them. But in doing so, we do have a national footprint. So we operate all across Australia. We have similar to sort of Amos's, we have a fleet of over 500 vehicles. We have offices all across Australia, and we've got projects all across Australia. So the task of understanding our emissions was quite complex and definitely required the engagement from different people within the business. So essentially I'll just ask for the next slide, sorry. What we did to first tackle this, similar to Airmaster, we were getting a lot of increasing pressure at the tendering stage, having to have responses from an ESG perspective, but also clients reaching out to us asking what our targets were, but also understanding that our scope 1 and 2 emissions form part of our clients' scope 3 emissions. So whilst it's important for us to understand our scope 1 and 2 for our benefit, our clients are asking for our scope 1 and 2 emissions and our impact for their benefit, because if we do operate physically on their sites, that becomes something that they have to report against for their scope 3. So to essentially understand first what our scope 1 and 2 emissions were, we did reach out to a number of consultancies, but also some carbon accounting platforms as well, understanding that consultancies have their place, but also platforms have their place as well. And it was important for us to not only involve myself in these discussions, but we also involved people from finance, and we also have a business systems analyst at Duratec as well. So it was important to have the right people in the room for the conversations. And we essentially looked, when we were comparing consultancies and platforms, we wanted to have a really standardized matrix so that we could compare everyone equally, and we didn't get too confused in how many platforms or how many consultants we were comparing against. So some of these things that we looked at was, what does our data look like now, and what do we have to do with the data in order for the consultant or the carbon accountant platform to analyze that data. So that was one thing that was a real big priority for us, because we are at a lower level of maturity. We are new to this process, and like I touched on, we're a national company, so we have a lot of data and it sits in different areas in the business. We also were understanding that we had the forthcoming mandatory disclosures, and our alignment to that is crucial as a business. So we really want to make sure that whoever we work with understands the Australian Accounting Standard Board's ASRS that's forthcoming, and how we disclose properly against that, because that's a really crucial component for our business. We also wanted to see if there was any integrations or anything that we could do to make our lives a little bit easier from the data collection perspective. But we also understood as well that things are constantly changing in this landscape. So what data we need to collect, how we collect that data, and how we present it and communicate it is going to change as well. So we wanted to work with a consultant or a platform that understood that and was readily adaptable to things that may change or different questions we might get asked. But obviously the key for us as well is that it's not just about measuring those emissions, it's about tracking those emissions and decreasing them as well, and having actions in place. So we really wanted to make the right decision so that we could essentially ensure that our end goal was not just to produce the numbers and present those numbers to our clients, but also make sure that we were tracking against those and reducing our emissions as well. So just the next one. So where we landed after that, it was a very long process going back and forth within business with different consultants and different carbon accounting platforms. And we developed some great relationships in doing so. And essentially, we landed on a consultant in the first instance. So we're currently engaging a consultant for our scope 1 and 2 emissions because we want to understand our operational impact first before going out and making a lot of change in our scope 3 impact, which is our downstream and upstream emissions in scope 3. Really wanted to control what we could control first before looking outward to scope 3. The mandatory requirements have obviously been delayed. The intent was that they would be in place sort of this financial year coming, but they have obviously been delayed. So we are still ahead of the game in getting our scope 1 and 2 out. But yeah, our decision was to engage a consultant in the first instance, really understand where our data sits in the organisation. Is it in the right form? What do we need to do to our data to improve it and make sure that we are actually tracking everything, because you obviously can't measure what you don't track. So what do we need to do as a business to make sure that for all emissions factors that are relevant to Duratec, we're measuring things? So that was a key process as well, was defining our emissions boundary for scope 1 and 2. So what is relevant, what's not relevant? Again, being a national contractor, we have lots of data. So we really want to make sure we're looking at the right data and doing the right things with that data. And then just for the next slide, moving forward, like I said, we are sort of just at the scope 1 and 2 phase at the moment, but moving forward, we recognise that scope 3 is often 80 to 90% of a business like ours emissions. So it's going to be a really, really crucial part of our emissions reductions and setting appropriate targets. So that's where we will have to engage a carbon accounting platform. So yeah, in looking at sort of consultants versus platforms, we saw the value in both. And yeah, we see that a platform is probably realistically the best way to operationalize our scope 3 data and make sure we're accurately tracking and measuring it, because we are such a large organization. But just some of the key things I guess I wanted to touch on for you guys, if there are some of you that this is resonating with and you are in a similar position to Duratec, I think the key takeaways would be have the right people in the room when you are having these conversations and looking into platforms or carbon accounting consultants. And also understand your emissions boundary as well, so that you can make sure you're collecting the right data and not focusing on data that's not relevant. But also understand your clients' expectations and also the expectations of the forthcoming mandatory disclosures and where you fall into that. Because it's, yeah, obviously for us, the disclosures have been pushed back, but that doesn't mean we're not seeing pressure from our clients, because often our clients are asking for things that are ahead of the disclosures. So it's really important, and something that we're doing as well is actually meeting with our biggest clients and their sustainability teams and asking what they need from us, so that we can bring that data into the picture and collect that data as well. But yeah, that's everything from me.
Thanks, Sam. And thanks, Jack. That was just covered there. That was great. Just throwing it to the audience, and I'm curious if people that we just might have an issue accessing the chat for some. I'm not sure if that's an experience. So if anyone wanted to just go off mute and also ask their questions themselves, if you just want to raise your hand or write in the chat. But perhaps while we're waiting, I can't see a question at the moment, but perhaps I know, Jack, oh no, we do have a question. Alfonso, did you want to go off mute?
Yeah, hi, there you go. I can do it now. This is for Sam. So Alfonso here from NetNata. We are a carbon accounting tool, but the question is more about how did you went about bringing people together? Because we see that a lot with our clients about a conversation about finding the right people to be in that working group, or convincing them this is part of their day-to-day and they should be involved in those decision making, so we can take that into account. How do you go about that internally?
Do you want me to answer that? It's Jack here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I just briefly I think there was a combination of asking for volunteers, people who were engaged and interested in putting some time. We didn't have a dedicated resource, but we also, because of we picked some specific stakeholders from accounts, because a lot of the accounts receivables obviously were a source of a lot of our electricity invoices, and another one was our fleet manager. So because we knew that we were going to need a lot of information on our fuel consumption. So we drafted some people in who we know were very were very important in terms of the key sources of information. So there's a combination of picking the right people, selecting people simply because of the department they're in that we knew would be useful, and also calling for volunteers and having I think we had there's about 8 of us in our working group, meeting monthly, and not making it too challenging from a time wise, has helped. Still, nothing's easy, but yeah, it's worked fairly well so far. I hope that helps. Yeah.
No, that's fine. Thank you. So everyone can hear it. It's so key for people in that kind of decision making to get involved. Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Alfonso. Perhaps while we're waiting, if anyone else has a question.
We have a couple of questions coming through in the chat. The first one is around the costs and the sort of budget that Sam and Jack allowed for carbon measurement.
Did you want to answer that, Sam, or I can? Yeah, from our point of view, we didn't have a lot of money, so yeah, we started. We deliberately, I think, started with a modest budget, and we weren't looking for bells and whistles. So we wanted something that was. We picked a small company to work with who were very flexible, and we knew that we would, we would have to pay more, and we would have more requirements later on. But we sort of started, with modest expectations of what we were trying, the type of reports that we wanted, and we found that was a good way to get the management on board. It wasn't a huge investment. And obviously now we've kind of got further that we're in a better position to get more funding if we want to go with expand the type of reporting services that we're doing. So but yeah, I think the biggest probably, I think the actual license costs are quite, I think, is the smallest part of it. It's the time and the effort, and whether using external consultants is probably more of a challenge from a financial point of view than the license cost of a product, is our experience so far.
Just to expand on what Jack's saying as well, within Duratec, we sort of have a formalized business improvement section. So this sort of falls within our, I guess, mentality to continually improve the business. So it was something the business was open to. But in doing so, we have to be very forthright in gaining comparative quotes. So I think that's something I would recommend, to make sure that you are going out to a number of providers and getting the quotes, and understanding where the differences between those sit. But also that matrix I touched on as well was really key for us. Because realistically, we were trying to make sure we found the right option that ticked the most amount of boxes for us. But from a cost perspective as well, like Jack touched on, because we are sort of at the lower maturity side of things, we did want to just understand scope 1 and 2 first. So that does obviously have cost implications. If you were trying to do the whole package, scope 1, 2, and 3, that's going to be more expensive. So just have a really clear picture of what you're looking for in the first instance, and then make sure, you do your due diligence in comparative quotes as well.
It's probably a good flow, and actually we have a question about what if you had to think about some of the key considerations where you were kind of trying to decide on a platform to go with and compare them, what were some of those?
I guess from Duratec's perspective, like I said, we had myself, finance, and our business systems analyst involved in the conversations. So we all had different buckets that we were looking into. I was really interested in making sure that we weren't just measuring for the sake of measuring, and we could track initiatives and see if we did introduce an initiative, what that did to our scope. 1 or 2 or even 3 down the line, I really wanted to be able to see that we could measure our impact and show essentially what changes we're having on reducing our scope. Finance were really interested in understanding how the data went in. So what did we need to do with the data? Do we need to manipulate it? Does it need to sit within a template? Can we just give you a dump of invoices and you can scrape them? So what do we need to do to the data before it can be manipulated and used? But then also, what does that data look like on the outside? So there's a lot of buzzwords and a lot of jargon in the sustainability space, but when things get reported on and there's tools to report where our scope 1 and 2 emissions sit, can that be interpreted by anyone in the business so that we can put a business case to things and say, hey, there's a lot of emissions in this sector, therefore we need to focus here. And likewise, our business systems analyst was really interested in if there was any integrations, could we bring our accounting platform into the carbon accounting platform, and then also the licenses, so who had access to the platform, but also what were the plans with the platform, like what are they currently looking at implementing or changing, and what does the roadmap for those implementations look like?
Yeah. Thanks, Sam. I'm going to come back to one of the questions, but I think, Jack, this could be a really good one for you. We have from Alexander. Did you engage with external consultants to focus on carbon footprinting only, or did you go beyond the footprint assessments, i.e. reduction strategy, reporting, and supply chain optimization?
So yeah, we didn't we haven't engaged with external consultants as such, but we the company that we chose to work with for our carbon platform had offered some consulting as part of the, I suppose, as part of the license fee. So we decided to so we have had some external advice, but it's probably just been packaged in with the license fee that we had. And yeah, so I think that when we get into scope 3, I think we're finding that is much more challenging and more complicated. So we possibly will need to use some external advice for that. But and I suppose we're probably like Duratec, we're a technical services company. So I think we in terms of implementing solar and other things, other projects that we've done, we've kind of I guess felt more confident dealing with actually implementing some projects and activities. So we haven't required any further advice on that. But I think we're certainly open to having professional advice, in the future, particularly with scope 3.
Yeah,
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that was great, and I think we've had a couple of other questions here, and I think there'll be great segues that in the next part of this seminar that we'll be exploring. We have a question around how to better understand scope 3 emissions, particularly in construction-related industries, and what are some good strategies to promote better reporting across the wider supply chain. So hopefully we'll be able to touch upon that when we look at integrating, insights, particularly from, carbon accounting platforms, but how to really kind of think about scope 3 strategies themselves. And we've also got a couple of comments here that are really interesting. And one of them is around that many carbon tool providers assume that a lot of organizations have the data easily in hand in an accessible format, which both of you kind of spoke about in various ways. And the comment is that it would be helpful to have a clear minimum viable input data required to utilize the features in alignment with the protocol versus what's an ideal data state. And this whole topic about data quality, data governance, data collection is about to be covered with our next speaker. So hopefully we'll be able to kind of move into the next section, having had those great insights from Jack and Sam, and we're going to touch on both those points. Thank you so much, Jack and Sam. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Over to you, Nargis.
Thank you, Dee. Hi everyone, this is Nargis. I'm senior consultant within Edge and also SPG lead. So I work with different clients on carbon footprinting, science-based target setting, and supporting client through the validation process of their target, plus mitigation modeling. So today I'm going to cover some requirement for data collection and how you should look at platform selection in terms of covering all the required indicator that you need to keep in mind when you're selecting the platform to be aligned with GHG protocol required data. So if you go to next, please, thank you. So for the data collection protocol, you can look it as when you're going to select a platform. If you look at the left part of the slide, so when you select, when the indicator that you need to keep in your mind when you're selecting platform is that is the platform asking you for the unit of the data. If the platform provides you with the footprint calculation approach, the emission factor source, the frequency of data collection, in your own style, like internal part, you should also keep the track of who is the data owner in the different category of emissions. So next year, when you're going to recalculate or calculate for next year footprint, you can get back to that same person and have a more accurate data collection. Also thinking about data source, the assumption, if all these aspects can be, if you are going to be asked about this different aspect when you are feeding data into your platform, that is really good because you are going to be asked later on if you want to be aligned with the GHG protocol data requirement. And also at the end, when you feed your platform with the more accurate data, you also have to look at your data after finishing the data collection. You should think about how I can improve my data for the next year. And if you look at the left, you can see that you should collect data on the different scopes of emission. You should keep track of different categories. You should keep track of calculation method, if it was based on activity, based on spend, based on mass, based on actual data or estimation. And you also need to rank the way that you collected data in different category as a best practice, compliant, or needs attention. So for instance, if in this year calculation you enter data in the platform that needs attention, next year that you are going to calculate your footprint, you need to get back and try to improve your data. If we go to next, please. Okay, so in this slide, I'm not going to read through different line in the table, but it is just for your reference for different categories of emission, starting from fuel, electricity, category 1 goods and purchased products and services, and so on. We have different methods of the calculating data and the calculating your emission on that specific category. For instance, for fuel, whether you can have the activity-based method, you can follow the activity-based method or the spend-based method. So if you follow the activity-based, you need to input your fuel consumption, whether based on liter of petrol or megajoule of natural gas. But if you follow the spend-based method, you have to enter based on a spend. So there are different hierarchy on the data collection, which I'm going to explain later on, but it's best to follow the more accurate method in each different category of emission, and you can see some definition for different method inside each category of emission. If we go into next. So in this slide, you will see the inventory quality management system. So once you've filled your platform with the required data, you have all your inventory ready for your footprint. So some aspects you need to keep in mind for improvement of your inventory. So first thing is establish inventory quality team. So inside your business, there should be some people who are responsible for the data collection, and also they are thinking about improvement of the quality of the data that you are collecting. Then they need to have some steps in place to improve as they go, like each year. For instance, if one category last year needs attention and you collected, for instance, fuel data spend base, they should be aware that, okay, for the next year, we should go with activity data and fuel-based, consumption-based data entry to improve the inventory as we go forward. And also there are some generic quality checks for the platform, which I'm going to show you in the next slide in more detail. And then you also, as part of perform sources specific quality check, you need to think about boundary, about the recalculation, about the accounting and reporting. So if those platforms going to ask you about the boundary, about the recalculation, about all those things that DG protocol required you to monitor and keep track of them. And definitely you will need to review the data that you are entering into your platform, whether technical internal review or external review of your data, if it is possible in your business. And then definitely gathering some feedback, made amendment to the data that you filled into the platform, and then you can then report and document and archive all the results that you are taking from the platform. If we're going to next. So this is just a quick screenshot of the generic quality management measure. So there's like a checklist in the data gathering phase, data documentation, and calculating emissions. So these are some options, like some point that you need to check when you're selecting platform. If, for instance, it is about like how good you are collecting data, if they had like the unit of data, the conversion factor that you used internally before you feed the platform, if you correctly converted the unit of the data, and like all different things that you need to consider. So I don't read through all the line, but we're going to share this slide deck after this presentation. If you go to the next, please. The key point when you're thinking about data is primary data versus secondary data. So this is the definition provided by GHG protocol, which is the best practice. So by primary data, this means that data from specific activities within a company's value chain. And secondary data is the exact opposite. So this is not inside the company's value chain. So by primary, this means the data actually provided by the supplier. So you have access to the actual data from the supplier. But for secondary data, you don't have access to that level of accurate data. So you just have access to industry average, like whether from public database or government statistics or literature review. So these are all secondary data, which are less accurate than the primary data. But they are fine if you don't have access to the primary data, but just these are two levels. If we go to the next, so there are some examples of primary and secondary data, but they're all these in this table looking at the scope 3. So just for whoever is not familiar enough with the scope 3, we have 15 different categories inside the scope 3 emissions, which in this table we'll list them. But there are some examples in the middle column for the primary data, and in the right column for the secondary data. So I just read through the purchased goods and services, the first line. So for instance, if you are collecting data, if you are entering data into the platform for the purchased goods and services, this can be primary data if you have access to the product level LCA factor. rather to gauge emission factor, or you have any access to site-specific energy use of those products. But if you don't have access to this primary data and you just have access to the consumption of that product, like, you know, for instance, you just know that like 3 liters of milk, but you don't know from which supplier with what emissions. So you just use average emission factor for Australian milk manufacturers, something like this. So there are like different examples in this table, which you can have a look in your own time later. If we can move to the next one. Yeah, and in this one, we have some advantage and disadvantage of primary data and secondary data. So for advantages, definitely primary data are more accurate. They give you the opportunity to track your performance. If you make changes to the way that you're operating your business, you can definitely monitor the changes if you're accessing if you're filling the platform with primary data, but definitely they are more expensive, more time consuming, and you may not have that access to the quality of those supplier specific data. And exactly the opposite for secondary data. Definitely the advantage is that you can have a very high level estimation of the footprint, so then you can make a decision on what are the hottest spots, so then you can aim for start collecting data, primary data collection on those specific hottest spots. And then they're not that, as a disadvantage, they are not that accurate, and you cannot effectively monitor the changes if you switch to better product or changes into the operation. And if we go to the next, and there are just some challenges and guidance for primary data. So for the primary data, one challenge is you have a large number of suppliers, which Nicole is going to explain later on how you can start prioritizing on the supplier selection. There can be some lack of supplier knowledge, which you should start collaborating with your supplier to upskill them. And then there can be lack of supplier capacity, which there are different guidance in this table that you can follow. I'm just conscious of time. And also, you should also keep in mind in confidentiality and also some language barrier when you're going to select them supplier, and like when you are using some questionnaire for like when you are working with supplier and you work on questionnaire, you should also keep in mind that to be in the same page with your supplier in terms of technical language that you are using. And next, please. And the final slide is guidance for collecting secondary data. And when you're selecting the platform. So the key point is that you should prioritize the database that you are using, whether they are using the internationally recognized emission factor, national government, and peer-reviewed emission factor in those platforms to calculate your emissions, and make sure that the data quality inside the platform is in a high level. And if the platform using some proxy, make sure that the proxy that they are using to fill in the gap are more close to the way that they should work. Like if they're using like the same regional emission factor, like more closest emission factor that they should grab for calculating your emission for data gaps. And you can see some examples in the right, like example of proxy, for instance, if the emission factor for electricity for one country is not available, using the most relevant one. And if you have some like 20% gap in the data, if the tool can provide you with a extrapolation to fill the gap. Next, please. And yeah, that's all about the data collection takeaway. As Dee mentioned earlier, better data means better insight, better decision, and can help you have better outcome at the end. Thank you. I hand over to Nicole.
Thank you, Nagas. Hey, everybody. I'm Nicole. I'm a principal consultant at Edge Impact. I've worked across Edge in strategy, in supply chain and procurement, and I work closely with the Decarb team as well. So I'm going to jump into our slides. We've got 10 minutes to talk to you about Scope 3 emissions. I can touch on Scope 1 and 2, but I feel like our case studies touched really well on those and how we use that Scope 1 and 2 data to set targets and find reduction. Scope 3 is the next frontier in terms of decarbonisation, and I want to speak to you about how you can use either supply Scope 3 data from either if you're calculating that by a spreadsheet from spend data, or if you have invested in a platform, a carbon platform that's helping you get that supplier data. No matter where you're at with your data, there are things that you can do. So 5 steps. Let's jump to the next slide and I will dig in. So it's all about prioritization. Everybody freaks out when they think about getting better Scope 3 data. As Naj has said, it's about the improvement year on year of getting better Scope 3 data and being able to then, the better your data and the more specific, the more you can calculate those reductions. So there's a lot of reasons why we want better Scope 3 data, but obviously there's a challenge because you need to get that from your suppliers. So looking at Scope 1, 2 and 3 data, the first thing you want to do is just understand what's material. And as Naga said, you can look at where those hotspots are. Where's your biggest emissions footprint? To really help you decide who you're going to speak to and what you're going to do about it. If you flick onto the next slide. So we talked a little bit earlier as well about engaging everybody from across the business to make decisions and to inform your plan for decarbonisation. So if you haven't yet talked to finance and procurement, I suggest that you do that straight away. Procurement is your new best friend in terms of getting your Scope 3 data from suppliers. So they really need to be on board. If you don't have a procurement team, it'll be sourcing or finance and accounts. And so talk to them. This is procurement language here, but segmentation. So what any platform or any Excel that's looking at that Scope 3 data can tell you is your categories of spend and the suppliers within those categories. So you can use that spend data, that supplier data, to start to segment into different categories and those different hotspots of your Scope 3 emissions footprint. If you flick to the next slide, this is where the prioritization comes in. So you've got your Scope 3 footprint, you're working with the procurement team and having a look at where those hotspots are. So where's your biggest, which suppliers and which categories of spend are contributing the most to your carbon footprint. So you've got it down to categories of spend, and then you can dig a bit further into suppliers, because you'll have some big tier 1 suppliers that you work with a lot, which have the biggest spend. So there's a bit of cross-referencing there on which of those are contributing the most around those goods and services that you're procuring to your footprint. And then have a look at where you've got control and influence as well. So this little graph here is just, this is looking at a category level, but you can do this for suppliers within each of these categories as well. And when I'm talking about categories, I'm talking about the different types of spend and the different goods and services that you procure as a business that makes up that Scope 3 footprint. So really what we're trying to do here is just prioritize. So the prioritization process is meant to make it easier for you when you start to try and get that better data from your supply chain. If you are using a platform that is going out to suppliers and you want to take on all of your spend and all of your suppliers, go for it. That's what platforms are there for, to help you manage that type of data. But we usually recommend, especially because there is usually, depending on your sector, some maturing that needs to happen from the supply chain and from your suppliers when you start asking them about carbon data and what they're doing. As I know a lot of you have experienced starting receiving those questions in tenders, tender requirements. You've been on that learning curve yourself. So I think it is important to do that prioritization process, segment, and eat the whale one bite at a time, as they say, and really get down to a short list of suppliers, pilot and approach first. This slide, there's a lot going on in this slide, I know, but if you just focus on that wheel, that what you're looking at here is that wheel of procurement and sourcing, so the different stages. So any organization, this is pretty standard and universal, any organization will follow this process. So what do we need to purchase? And then how do we go about that? So whenever you're issuing a tender or a quotation, there's opportunity to work into these steps of procurement, questions that you can ask the supplier. So any information that you're gathering from a platform helps inform these steps. I'll just call out a few and we'll share these slides. And if anyone wants more info on what you can do in terms of supply chain engagement, do reach out. But really you're looking at, adding carbon questions into the tender and quotation requirements. Anytime you're engaging with a new supplier, you can start to ask them some simple questions about what they're doing with carbon. And you can do that whether you've calculated your emissions data or not. Conscious of time because we're running out here, and I'll give some time for questions, but flick to the next slide. And this one is around those engagement and collaboration opportunities. When you are going through that procurement process, talk to your suppliers, ask them what they're doing in carbon, ask them upfront before you set tender and the quotation requirements. Because first of all, if they're already doing something, that's great. You get an understanding of maturity of suppliers and what you can include. And if they're not, then there's a learning process that needs to go on. But as we've heard from the case studies as well, often people are already doing this because there's just such an increasing amount of pressure to understand carbon at the moment. So you may be surprised what your suppliers are already doing. And last slide. So 3 things you can start asking your suppliers, whether you've done a footprint for scope 3 or not. Ask them if they understand their own scope 1 and 2 footprint. Ask them if they've thought about their scope 3 footprint, and ask them as well around, do they have any information on the products or services that they're providing to you? And whether or not they can answer this question, it doesn't matter. If they can, great. If not, you're starting to set that precedent, an expectation, and asking them to start thinking about it. And I'll just end with a couple of do's and don'ts that kind of echoes what Nagas was saying as well. Come up with a plan, look at your data and use that data to inform your next steps. And you don't have to do it all. You can start somewhere. You don't have to have a beautiful, complete set of data to do this. Use what you have to inform your approach. Keep it simple from your suppliers. Make sure it's consistent and work within the organisation. Make sure you're not rolling out a bunch of different questionnaires on ESG. Try and do it consistently and together. And yeah, don't expect all your suppliers to have the same quality of data. As we know, this is a big learning process for everybody. And definitely don't underestimate the power of procurement to achieve your carbon reduction. There's so much you can do within that procurement cycle. If you don't have it, look up ISO 2400, the Sustainable Procurement Guidance. There's so much info in there on how to use procurement and leverage it to start getting information from suppliers. Okay, I think we've allowed a little bit of time for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Nagas. Did anyone have a question they wanted to ask directly or to put in the chat, or as Emily suggested, just to even share your own experience of using platforms to support your scope 3 or decarbonisation strategies? from Charlotte. Thanks, Charlotte. Getting us started. On Nicole's start, how can companies use suppliers' total scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions data meaningfully in their own inventories? Do you need to kind of use percentages of spend data to apportion emissions? And guidance would be valued here, as many companies are asking companies for random data.
Sure. So I think what you're asking here is around how you use how to use the data meaningfully. So those first points 1, 2, and 3 really was speaking to that in terms of analysing your own data to make a planned approach so that, and do have a plan before you start asking every supplier for all emissions data. You can definitely start asking them to think about it. Like on that last slide is really, do you have organisational emissions and do you have product or service emissions? Because that information is really what you need for your scope 3 footprint to improve it. But really that piece around hotspots and which suppliers or which supplier categories contribute the most to your footprint helps narrow it down and get quite specific on the data that you want from which suppliers. You can, I mean, most people I think are asking questions on emissions or organisational emissions, which is good. Everyone should start to know that. That's how our scope 3 and supply chain information is going to improve year upon year as everybody starts to get that data. So I'm not sure what other questions you're seeing out there in terms of asking for random data. But if you, those first 2 to 3 points on understanding your hotspots, if you have a list of what are the products and services that contribute the most to your footprint, that will help you narrow down, okay, we want product footprint data, maybe life cycle analysis data or footprints from certain products that you're procuring for XYZ suppliers. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
I think part of that is that it's not an all or nothing. Like using a spend-based approach can really help with that prioritization, as Nicole mentioned, to then really prioritize which suppliers you want to engage after looking at the spend, calculating the emissions you're aware of in that first kind of instance, which are your kind of key suppliers and which hotspots they represent. David, given government is mandating scope 3 disclosures, is it reasonable to expect them to establish a clearinghouse for emissions data so companies can start sharing the same data and consistency can be improved and questionnaire fatigue can be avoided?
I can definitely speak to this one. This is the utopia that we would love to see. I know that there are some bodies having a look at this, some advocacy bodies, I mean, because obviously, especially from an industry point of view, that's going to be a game changer. I cannot say on where that's up to or yeah, any expectations on that. But yeah, absolutely, like advocacy for government to be doing this is a big one. Or if you're working at an industry level, we've seen this happen with the modern slavery legislation where sectors get together and share data. That is best practice. We saw that with the Property Council of Australia doing that for modern slavery data. So where and there are, while it's not at the public level, there are certain platforms which when they have clients using so many clients in the same sector, and then they offer the option for suppliers to share their data so that they only have to answer questionnaire once or across platforms ideally. But I feel like, yeah, it is probably a long way off in terms of having all data sharing across organisations or suppliers. What sectors?
Future of interoperability, hopefully there. I think we've got time just to squeeze in one more here. How do these platforms work along reporting standards? Sorry, just lost it as it spit. How do platforms work along reporting standards such as climate active, which require use of prescribed emissions factors? Actually, given that we have a platform provider on the call, Alfonso, I wonder if you wanted to kind of talk about, I know that NetNada does support users achieve climate active certification.
Sure, I'll speak broadly to that, and thanks for calling me out. So yeah, I'm Afonso. I'm from a carbon accounting platform called NetNada. In terms of assisting clients with climate active or other third-party certifications, what you would see is that carbon accounting tools becoming certification agnostic, in a sense where they would call for alignment with certain things that the clients are requesting. The difference between being GHG protocol align or climate active align, it's just in terms of like cutting and shaping the data and the requirements that go behind it. So as the presenters were saying previously, you might draw your boundaries in a certain level, and that the level needs to align with whatever certification you are trying to acquire. So you're just on that setup process initially. You'll just define, is it material, or does your company want to seek certain certifications? And if they say yes, your platform provider will say, okay, if you want to achieve climate active, you'll also need information on this specific category. And if you don't do that, you won't be able to achieve that certification. That's kind of where the platform providers will kind of give the input. And after that, you just follow a standard procedure that everyone kind of goes through the same process. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks. Well, thank you so much. I think we'll probably, in the interest of time, need to move along to our next section, but it's really trying to bring everything all together and think about some of the key considerations when selecting a platform. Over to you, Vanessa.
Thanks, Dee. As we're coming to the end of this session, we'd like to roll this back up into thinking about how we can start approaching selecting a platform that might suit your business. And I know Emily has been active in the chat and has mentioned a checklist that we have been developing alongside CitySwitch that should help businesses in that selection process. But I'll go over the key points for that now. And so thinking about platforms, what we know is that there's a lot out there. There are so many solutions on the market, with each offering something slightly different. And some of these are just your basic, built on thinking about that middle column that Dee presented before, just a little bit above Excel, carbon accounting, spend-based data, through to that strategic advisory and target setting and scope 3 data collection. And we also know that there is quite a lot to learn in terms of carbon accounting, depending on where your organisation is at on your ESG journey. There can be a steep learning curve that I'm sure many of you have been through in the past. So when we're thinking about the selection process for a carbon accounting platform, the most important thing, as we've heard from Airmaster and Duratech and Sam and Jack's case studies earlier, understanding your business needs are absolutely critical to engage before engaging a carbon platform. So this includes what you will use the platform for. Is it for emissions calculation only, or do you need a full scope of ESG reporting with all the bells and whistles? Are there any reporting considerations like climate active that you need to align with? Other ones could be the NGES or CDP disclosure, are all things that companies may need to report to. And also whether you have any third-party data assurance requirements. So does your data, your emissions data and your reporting need to be audited by a third party before you publish that? So knowing exactly the use case for data collection for the emissions platform. Resourcing, another big one that's come up in the questionnaire, in the Q&A, how much time, budget and people you have available to collect data and use the platform over multiple years. So thinking about the upfront data collection, who are the people that need to be involved? Will you have one primary user or multiple? And do you need additional support to build that internal capability within your team before even approaching the data collection piece? And then thinking as well about the actual data that you needed to collect. And Narges and Nicole have done a great job of covering some of the basics around secondary and primary data across the different spend categories. So knowing what data you already have, what data you need, and the data you're hoping to gather from the platform will help you prepare for that initial onboarding phase, which we've heard from CitySwitch members is often the longest and most grueling part of using a carbon accounting platform, but not just a platform, it's any emissions calculation. The initial data collection is often what takes the most time and resources. And as well, if you're able to identify any gaps in your data or anything you don't know, these are some of the questions that you can bring to a platform as you start approaching them. So once you have a really good understanding of your business needs, the second thing is to understand the offering. As we know, there's many different platforms up there. So if you're prepared with your questions, or as Sam and Jack had a list of priority matrices or features that you're looking for in a platform, that can really help to guide your selection process. So we've got a few listed here, one of them being the target audience and maturity. So checking whether a platform is actually built for an organization of your size, or for whether it's an enterprise solution that might be a little bit too advanced for your needs right now, and also whether they're able to grow with you over time. So you might need a simple solution now, but looking ahead in the next 5 years, can that platform still support your reporting needs and also your organization? Data collection, this was one that Sam touched on. What are the input requirements of the platform that will help your organization gauge the resourcing needed for the initial and also ongoing data collection and input? For example, some platforms require data to be input in a CSV format or a very specific file. Others take raw spend data and automate data collection through APIs, and they map the spend for you. Most of them are a mix of both, but understanding what the platform is required from your side will help with that resourcing piece. We also spoke a little bit before about data validation, and it's important to understand when you're approaching a platform who is accountable for the data and the accuracy, and what the methodology is around making assumptions in calculations. And this is something that when you're engaging the platform, you can ask them about, so that you can help upskill your team around that decision making. Reporting, another one that's important. The platform should be able to provide data outputs that can support your organization to meet any current or future emission or disclosure requirements. And as your organization's approach to emissions reduction matures, strategic support such as target setting, validation, carbon offset, certifications, and peer benchmarking across the industry may become important features for your strategy and disclosure. So not necessarily in the first instance, but it could be something that you're interested over time. And if you are, it's important to approach that with the platform to see if that's available. Training and support, another big one from our CitySwitch members. So depending on the business needs, the level of training and support provided within the pricing of a platform may inform your selection. And organizations that are just starting out might need additional levels of support during the initial data collection and ongoing phase. And this can look different across different platforms. Some provide a key account manager that are with you through the entire process, and some are a little bit more hands-off. So understanding what kind of support that you're looking for is really critical. And moving on, there are plenty of other considerations, including the time that's needed for onboarding, integration with existing ESG platforms that your organization might already be using, data security and privacy, and the list goes on. So as I mentioned, CitySwitch alongside Edge, we've developed a couple of resources that should help guide the selection process and navigate this space. But in the interest of time, I might hand back over to Emily for a bit of a closing summary.
Amazing. Thanks, Vanessa, for whipping through that. If you want to flick to the next slide there should be a little bit of detail on what's next. But yeah, firstly, just wanted to thank all the Edge team for presenting today and covering so much in the last hour and a half. That was amazing. And also to thank Jack and Sam for their insights. And we've had plenty of conversation in the chat and plenty of questions come through as well. So thank you for everyone to coming along today and engaging in this topic. What's next? We do have some resources that will be produced to accompany this session. So the checklist that's been mentioned will be released on the CitySwitch website in the next couple of weeks. There's also some member case studies to come, and then finally some written guidance to further explore that data governance piece as well. So look out for those, and we'll send around the links once they're up on our website too. That's all to kind of round it out as far as carbon accounting platforms. But if I could just mention a couple of other CitySwitch events happening, we're also focusing on energy efficiency at the moment. And we've just run a webinar last week on energy efficiency. The recording is now on our website, but we've got 2 in-person workshops coming up next week. So if you're down in Melbourne, Monday the 17th at lunchtime, and if you're in Sydney, Tuesday morning on Market Street here, we'll be hosting workshops to support you understand those opportunities and calculate how to reduce energy in your office. So please jump on to cityswitch.au/events to find the links to those. And otherwise, I'll leave it there. Thank you again for coming along this afternoon. We would love your feedback and your thoughts on how we can improve these sessions. So there's a QR code here, and I'm just dropping a direct link into the chat as well, so you can complete just a quick 3-minute survey. We'd love to hear what you found useful from the presentation today on this topic and what further support could be provided. Otherwise, I can see people dropping off. So thanks again and enjoy your afternoon.